Right Night is a talk show with published authors, writers, and content creators discussing both the creative and technical sides of writing, as well as the industry surrounding it, from novels to screenplays to comics and more. And now, here's your host, author Travis I. Sivart.
Welcome to Right Night. This is one of my older interviews from Sounds of Steam from 2012 through 2014, or one of the interviews I did at a convention along the way. So sit back, relax, and enjoy a little bit of retro interview from myself and others.
We are so excited to be sharing tea time with Gail Carriger this evening. She is the author of the Parasol Protectorate series, as well as the Finishing School series, and many other little short stories that you can find out there if you just know where to look. So how are you this evening, Gail?
I'm great. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Well, thanks for joining us. I've enjoyed your books also, and I don't know, I just want to kind of immediately get into that. Wendy, what all have you read of hers so we can share with folks?
I have read pretty much everything, including the manga versions of the Parasol Protectorate. And she, actually, Gail, you just released a short story called Fairy Debt very recently.
Did, yes.
I downloaded that on my Kindle the day it happened. I haven't had a chance to read it yet. And I have also read Etiquette and Espionage, which is the first book in the Finishing School series.
That's right.
And I think people have mostly heard of your series, but in case they haven't, could you describe the world of the Parasol Protectorate for those who've never visited it?
Well, it's kind of a mashup of everything but the kitchen sink that I love and that I really wanted to read, and nobody was writing it, so I kind of felt compelled that I had to be the person to write it. And it's essentially a humorous comedy of manners story told with a strong female protagonist that has both steampunk and kind of urban fantasy elements. And so I tend to call it either urbane fantasy or tea-punk, which is my favorite because it is really saturated with tea. I like to say that in my books, things tend to explode, and then everybody runs around and then puts on a silly hat and sits down and has tea and talks about it. That's kind of what.
That's a good way to describe it. I've read the Parasol Protectorate also, and I tell you what, as a guy who doesn't read, certain genres very often, it's really fun. I really enjoyed the heck out of it. It keeps you entertained, the male and the female characters on both sides, and well done.
Oh, thank you. I came to steampunk from the aesthetic movement as a second wave steampunker, and so one of the things that always attracted me about steampunk was the whimsical sort of silliness of the way people dressed and the gadgets that people got into. And so for me, it was kind of an imperative to make sure that was also in my fiction. So I love it when people describe my books as like whimsical or silly or fantastical or ridiculous even, because it's kind of what I'm going for. I want people to just leave my books with a big smile on their face. That's really all I'm after.
I think you did a good job of that. And I also, as somebody, I really enjoyed your books move forward each book. The story changes. It's not the same story redone. It lets character growth happen, and not just with the main character, but secondary characters also. And that's not something you see a lot.
It's important to me. I mean, I people my universe with characters that have their own backstory and their own life story. And yeah, they're sort of interacting and reacting to the main character, but their lives are progressing even as hers is. And the same thing happens with the young adult. In fact, I think in the new series, the Finishing School series, it might even be more extreme, because when you are a teenager, everything seems to move faster and people seem to get to change and evolve and grow and come to revelations quite quickly. So Sophronia really changes quite a bit from each book as she learns more about herself as well as kind of where she fits into the universe. But Alexia, that's my tea alarm. In case there were some strange reason why I forgot that it was time to caffeinate. That's my caffeination alarm.
What kind of tea are you drinking, by the way?
I am drinking super strong Twinings. It's just called Twinings Strong, I think. It's basically an English breakfast, but it's highly caffeinated. I have to order it special from the UK. It's not here in the US. Anyway, so
in the UK.
Oh my goodness, it always tastes better there. I think it's not just the tea. I think it's the water and the milk. I think everything is different and superior there in the tea arena.
Because we lived there for 2.5 years, and we just returned to the United States in June, and I miss it very, very much, including the tea. But you know,
this is a total deviation. But which part of England did you live in?
We were down near Bury St Edmunds in Cambridge.
Ooh,
so about 2.5 hours north of London.
Yeah.
And what parts of England do you hang out in?
Well, my grandparents my family's Londoners by birth and years and years and years, but actually they'd moved out of London by the time I was born, and so and retired to a little community in Devon near Exeter. And so most of my experience was quite colored by the fact that I spent my childhood in the nicest part of England and the only part that consistently gets sunlight, right on the moor with a beach and little fishing boats, and it was totally picturesque and stunning and beautiful. And that experience really sneaks into etiquette and espionage and curses and conspiracies, because the school is in Devon, because that's my home. But I actually went to graduate school there, and I ended up way in the north in Nottingham, which is completely different in every way from Devon. So that was a bit of a culture shock for me, but I learned to love it eventually.
I love how the finishing school series ties into the Parasol Protectorate. It's what, about 30 years prior to the events?
Yeah, exactly. 25 years. Mm-hmm.
But you do have one character right there in Etiquette and Espionage who showed up in the Parasol Protectorate series. And I don't want to give anything away unless you want to share any of this. But when I saw her, I thought, so this is what she was like as a young lady.
Yes, that's one of my favorite things. I mean, it's so much fun to write, and I won't tell, in case anybody out there hasn't read it, but this is a key character in my adult series who comes in the second book, so that'll give you a big hint as to who it is. But she's kind of jaded by the time she's an adult in the Parasol Protectorate books, and it was really fun to kind of write her as a younger, more excited, more excitable child, and her view of the universe and stuff before she's had her heart broken and lost people and things like that. So it was really fun to write her. And there's another minor character who is introduced in the second book who doesn't go on to become a major character but stays minor, who becomes a more major character in the finishing school books. And there'll be a few other familiar faces, and It is me. I love twists. So I've just been contemplating how to add a few little twists about how some of these characters influenced some of the other characters in the Parasol Protectorate as well. So
I love expanded worlds where you touch on the history or other regions, in the current era. It just expands it so much, it makes it feel that much more real.
Exactly. And it's so much fun to just play in my own sandbox. I've always admired authors like Mercedes Lackey or Anne McCaffrey, who just built this world or universe that they just played in. So I've always kind of wanted to do that. So I feel really lucky that I get to.
So how did you? Go ahead.
Sorry, I was just gonna say, and of course I can also drop a few little hints and teasers for the next adult book, which is coming out in a couple of years. That people will. My ploy is to always make it so that every time you read a new book that I've written, it tells you something about some of the hints that I seeded in the earlier books, so that when you then hopefully go back and reread stuff, you learn new things and you have new revelations because of the later books that have been introduced. So
it's really well done. I mean, not that I've read it yet, but that's awesome to put that back and forth in with yourself.
And I always want to at least reward careful readers. I call it giving them cookies. I want to write a book
biscuits.
Exactly, or biscuits.
Biscuits are delicious.
I want to write something that that people return to, and that a casual reader could pick up and really enjoy just because of the plot or the romantic elements or the funny or whatever it is you're looking for in a book, but also that a devoted reader can go back to and get new things out of, so that they're rewarded for their loyalty, I guess. You can probably tell that loyalty is a theme in all of my books, and it's really important to me.
Well, that's actually something I've seen in your personality with the way you respond to people's tweets or Facebook messages. You take time to do that. You did that with me a year and a half ago, and I just found it awesome that, you would do that.
I don't always remember, but I do. Like some people will tweet me and then like 2 years later be like, "Do you remember when you were talking to me?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm sorry."
I don't expect you to actually remember that, but it's nice that you do it. You give that connection to your readership.
Yeah, well, I think it's really important. I mean, I am allowed the like very great honor and pleasure of being a full-time writer because of my readers, and I owe it to them never to forget that fact. And, even though I'm getting quite successful or reasonably successful, it would be a shame and an embarrassment to forget that the whole reason I get to do this is because everybody's out there reading my books. And frankly,
well done that you remember it.
And frankly, Solus did really well because there was a huge kind of word-of-mouth online blogger, librarian, independent bookstore sort of campaign of people who just fell in love with that book. Partly, I think, because it was something different they'd not really read or heard of before, and partly because a female voice doing humor is so rare in the genre that that they're the reason that book took off and did so well. And I can't forget that. I think I would be an embarrassment to authors if I did.
No, I definitely agree.
Now, considering you got your master's in archaeology back in 2008, did you...
Way back.
Yeah. Did you plan to be more Indiana Jones than P.G. Wodehouse back then? I mean, did you expect this to happen?
I did not. In fact, the only thing, if you asked me when I was a child, I would have told you two things. I would have said, I want to be an archaeologist, and I would have said, I love writing, but I'm never going to be a writer because no one ever makes money as a writer. And of course, an archaeologist is so lucrative, but we'll put that aside. At least it's a steady job because you're an academic usually.
That's true.
But yeah, I was on that fast track to being a full-time academic. I left I was almost finished with my PhD at the time. And it just became too challenging to balance both careers and also medically difficult. I was starting to get repetitive stress and carpal tunnel from trying to write a thesis all day and correct papers and then write fiction. So basically, I just I had to make a choice, and I could leave. My department was very understanding, and they basically were like, "We'll always be here. You can come back anytime."
Nice.
My professor's tenured. So I just said, okay, I'm going to go try this strange other thing that I never thought would happen.
So how often do you
use...
Oh, go on.
Sorry, go ahead. I was just I always wrote.
So when did you start writing?
I'm a child writer, always. I have two funny child stories. The first one is that my first full sentences, you have to understand that my father is a woodworker, a carpenter, and my mother is a professional gardener, a landscaper. And so my first full sentence was, "My mother's always dirty and my father's always dusty." which
nice.
Is probably a sign of what was to come. But so and my mom used to read me stories out loud, which I think is one of the keys to, if you want a child who's going to be a reader or a writer, that's going to help a lot. She's a wonderful British accent and would do all the voices and everything too. And I would correct her if I thought the ending of the book she was reading was wrong. I would stop her, and then I would start to tell her the correct ending. So another
like Fred Savage in the movie Princess Bride.
Yes, very similar to that. I'd be like, no, it can't end like that.
Which is different from the book. I'm guessing you've read that book?
I've read that book, yeah. It's one of the few where I will take a firm stand that I think the movie is better than the book. It's one of the only ones out there. But although now in my adulthood, I'm starting to be a little bit more jaundiced about the Princess Bride because Buttercup is so ineffectual.
Yeah. Yeah, I've never actually all thought she was that pretty either.
Oh, I think she's pretty, but I really wish she was a little bit more powerful.
Yeah, I like books with strong heroines, and that was exactly what drew me into Solus. And I don't know, I just don't enjoy the heroine who always needs someone to rescue her. I think it's okay some of the time, but you should also be able to fend for yourself. And yeah, I think that's an issue with Buttercup there that I have to.
I actually had a friend that said that your main character in Parasol Protectorate wasn't strong and needed rescued all the time. And I just stared at her going, have you read the books? Because, no, she's a great character, and she pushes the people trying to rescue her out of the way. Mm-hmm. I got this.
And it's also one of the things that I wish there was a good book out there on this subject, but I have a couple of minor degrees, and one of them is in classical mythology. Mm-hmm. And I've always loved the female mythos. And so all of my characters, both Sophronia and Alexia, even though they're independent to a certain extent, they're not a hero and they're not going on the hero's journey. I'm way more interested in the heroine's journey. And the way women accomplish things in the heroine's journey is through consultation and companionship and the utilization of other people's skills. Mm-hmm. And so, in other words, they build a friendship network or a familial network in a lot of the Greek stuff around themselves. And that's not weak. And I am always striving as an author to make that very, very clear that one person against the universe on their own doesn't have to be the model, that you should be able to build strong ties to other human beings on this planet and then utilize their skills just as they utilize yours and be loyal to them and interdependent. And that's actually your greatest strength.
I agree.
So all of my characters try to do that. And some readers do sort of perceive that because it isn't one woman in a crop top with a tramp stamp running around slaying things with a sword. They don't see it as strong, but I do. I think it's just a different kind of strength.
No, go ahead, Wendy.
Oh, I was just going to say, I noticed the werewolf packs, they form those attachments and rely upon each other. And it's not just in a brutish strength way. I mean, they consult with one another before making certain moves. And I realize it's a pack hierarchy, but you can see that there's friendship there as well.
And even to a certain extent, my vampires have that. I mean, the vampires that are dysfunctional are the ones that are more tyrannical. So, like, the most functional vampire is the Rove Lord Akaldama, even though he's kind of a tragic figure. But he also has an entire network, essentially, of young men who he is relying upon for his entertainment and information.
And I do love what happens to Biffy. Again, I'm not going to tell anyone, but Biffy, it was. I usually have a great idea about what's going to happen to the main characters and the main inner dynamic with the romance, if there is a romance going on. But I don't always know what's going to happen to my side characters. And Biffy was actually one of those side characters, and his little journey was completely unexpected. I didn't know he was going to become important, and then he did. And then he actually develops into a secondary point of view character by the last book. And
that's a nice surprise as a writer when your character does that for you.
Yeah, it was really kind of thrilling, and he turned in the middle of the adult series. He's quite tragic as a figure, and then I got to give him his little resolution, kind of bittersweet happy ending.
Sure,
but that was very exciting as a writer. It is extremely exciting because it feels like you did your job and you really did build these characters to have their own lives, and then they went off and had them, and then they come back and tell you about them, and you're like, oh, that fits this way into my book.
So is there any other characters you want to pronounce for listeners? Just some characters that people always get it wrong?
People always, I'm a reader like so many readers. I mispronounce things all the time. So I pronounced Macon until my mother, who's English, said no, it should actually be Macan, because I wanted him to sound like bacon.
Right. Because everybody loves that.
Exactly. So I mispronounced my own character's name. So I pretty much, you can pronounce them however you want to pronounce them. You're the reader. Interpret at will. That's always my feeling.
That's pretty cool of you. I like that. That's good job. It's
why I think, unlike a lot of authors, I don't really perceive my books as my babies. I think I used to be a potter along with everything else. So I used to produce, throw on the wheel and then sell things. And you don't know what's going to happen to that pottery once it's out and away from you. I mean, somebody could be using it for a chamber pot for all you know, right?
Right.
So I hope nobody's doing that.
You hope it, but necessity dictates, right?
Books as toilet paper. That would be horrible.
They could have the whole collection, couldn't they? So
but I kind of feel like my books, like, I have written the words down on the page, and it's up to everybody else to kind of interpret them. That's why I was so relaxed about allowing the manga to be made from it and things like that. I feel like that's a new interpretation. It's someone else's voice, and
so are you less affected?
I let go easy.
Are you less affected by reviews than most authors then?
No, I think all of us suffer from review trauma. I actually don't read them anymore.
I've heard a lot of times never read your own reviews, just write.
Yeah, exactly. I think it impinges too much, and it's very confusing too for the author, because something that one reviewer loves, another reviewer will hate, and then you're just like, well, I can't do anything about it. Yeah. So and also, I'm an author with with the big 5 publishing houses now. So
congratulations.
Oh, thanks. But basically what it means is the book is written 6 months to a year before it comes out, sometimes more. And there's literally nothing I can do to change anything, even if somebody had a very good suggestion or critique. And often I'm several books ahead of the one that's out right now. So I can't, like, people will email me and be like, you should change this aspect of your universe. And I'm like, even if I wanted to, I really couldn't at this juncture. So,
Wendy, you've read the manga, so how do you feel that compares to the regular books?
I like seeing the Parasol Protectorate rendered in a visual format, and it's not perfect, of course, but I think it takes everything important from the story and puts it out there, and I enjoy it. I think for someone who's new to the series, who's maybe never read it and enjoys manga, they should buy it, and it will give them a better idea of what they're getting into when they actually read the series, because obviously the manga is much shorter than the novels themselves.
And Gail, how has the response to that been?
Well, fortunately for me, I read manga before I was approached to have this done, and so I was prepared for all the characters to look younger and be hairless and have great big eyes and be cuter than I described them and all that sort of stuff. But I did get a lot of people who were like, wait a second. Although I will say that Alexia has the rack that I described in the manga. She doesn't have it on the covers, but she has it in the manga. I was like, look at that girl. Woohoo!
Yep.
Yeah, and I like that she's so different, and she's a curvy woman as opposed to the societal standard, and well done in making her so different.
Well, I mean, that's part of me, as I was like,
sure.
I've been dealing with a rack for most of my life, and I like to write a character who has to deal with it too. But
and deal with it as opposed to it being a positive feature. It's actually a derogatory feature in that society.
In fact, one of my favorite books to write is the 4th book of that series, because Alexia is pregnant, quite pregnant, which is that's a big spoiler, but there it is. And so, but the physical comedy that can result from that was so much fun to write, because she can't see her feet, she's stumbling over anything, she's like emotional and crying about stuff, and it's all. I happened at the time to have a bunch of friends around me who were pregnant, so I was just ruthlessly stealing from them and their crazy eccentricities.
Yeah, so, I should have read that when I was pregnant the second time. Gosh, I didn't think of rereading it, but I should have.
Yeah, it was so much fun to write.
So on the reverse, with the manga out, have you got new readers of your regular books from it?
It's hard to tell at this juncture. I mean, first of all, my perceptions are very biased because most of the interaction I get is from people who are on the internet. And that is, only a certain percentage of readers, and I spend most of my time in venues that already demographically cultivate a certain age group. So I'm on Facebook, which is people my age, and Twitter, which is mostly writers and more people my age. I'm not really on Tumblr or whatever the young people are doing these days.
Right.
So I honestly don't know. I like to hope so, but I have no idea.
I suspect you'll get the readers that are 15 to 22, and 3 years to 8 years after they read the manga, they'll go back and get your regular book. So you'll see a surge in about 5 years of people who go, oh, these are great.
I like to hope that. I like to hope that happened and that people read the manga and maybe went and picked up the young adult series correlatively as well. But like I said, I really don't know. It's hard to know.
A lot of writers, they're afraid to branch from an adult series to a young adult series, especially in the same world. I've never felt it's a problem if done gracefully. How about you with that transition? Has there been any issues?
I did get a couple of readers who wrote to me and said, I don't read young adult, so I'm just not going to read these books. And I was like,
really? They don't read young adult?
Yeah. It's like, there's nothing I can do about that, And of course, the great secret is that I come out of young adult. So I mostly wrote young adult, and that was what I always hoped to get published. But it just never was working for me. And so I started writing adult sort of as default. But I basically write kind of as a comfortable I write young adult length. That's my standard length. So with the Alexia books, essentially what I did was wrote young adult length, and then I added in either the second POV character or additional complexities and extra descriptions and stuff like that. So most authors I know write too long and then cut. And I'm one of the few out there who, when I'm writing an adult book, I actually write too short and then I build up.
That's funny to hear that, because I do the exact same thing.
See, there are a few of us out there. But I think what people respond to and really love, especially about Soulless, is that it's essentially kind of a young adult. It's also a romance and stuff, but it's written with the same kind of sharp speed and clarity. So I'm paying very close attention in that book to making sure that there's always some sort of tension going on in every scene, whether it's romantic tension or physical danger or some other thing that's going on, or new character or conversation or something. And those are all.
You do a great job of cutting off your chapters at the right time too. And a lot of authors are just learning to do it at exciting times instead of the downtime. So good job.
And that's young adult tricks, frankly. Like, I'm using a lot of young adult tricks, and also I use chapter titles, which not a lot of authors do anymore, and I'm kind of on a one-woman quest to bring them back because I love them so much.
I've debated on that. Wendy, how do you feel about chapter titles? I love them as a reader. But
I love them. I think they're a lot of fun, and I'm actually probably going to use them next time. But that's one of the things I love about your books is the chapter titles.
They're just me exercising my whimsicality as in some new venue.
When I was reading Etiquette, sorry, Travis.
It's okay.
When I was reading Etiquette and Espionage, I think I was giggling every other page, and my poor husband looked at me like I was crazy. And I said, "It's her newest book. It's funny. It's great." And I kept saying different things out loud from it, different little contraptions and other things that are in the book, and he just kind of rolled his eyes at me.
I get that a lot. I get a lot of husbands who actually eventually end up reading my books or boyfriends, just because the wife or girlfriend was sitting there in bed giggling so much that they were like, "What are you reading?" And it's actually demographic. I've noticed it. In fact, I think my omnibus editions helped as well, because the first omnibus that came out through SF Book Club did not have a pink cover. But I have noticed that at my signings, I'm getting more and more men, which
nice.
I never, frankly, I didn't really expect that much, but I'm super excited about it. And I suspect that part of it is giggling partners.
Giggling does attract people.
You love a great story? Fantasy, swords and sorcery, sci-fi, cyberpunk, cyberpulp. Look up Travis Sivart on Amazon and other fine retailers for ebooks, paperbacks, hardbacks, and audiobooks. And enjoy.
Gail, before we left, we were talking about people who do chapter titles. And I wanted to, when I used to read when I was younger, I read Piers Anthony and Robert Asprin, the Myth series in particular, and they always did chapter titles. And I always thought it was so much fun. So who were you reading in your teens?
Well, I was raised on a lot of British, what we would call now young adult, but when I was little, it wasn't young adult, like The Water Babies or The Wind in the Willows, and then, of course, Tolkien and things like that. But a lot of the early young adult, even the Victorian young adult literature, had titles in it. And so that's what I was raised with. And like School for Scandal and some of the old pre-Victorian writings all have it. And so essentially, I love them.
They were paid by the word, though, so.
That's true. And Dickens, yeah. And essentially, or serialized work like Dickens stuff. But essentially, what I wanted to do was just exercise the humor in a new and exciting way. And chapter titles were one way to do that. I pretty much will do anything for a laugh. Like, I'll break the fourth wall if I have to,
awesome.
if it's going to get me a laugh. So
she will
chapter
jump the
awesome.
shark.
Yeah. Whatever it takes.
That's good stuff there. It's I want to hang out with you more now. It's something. I was talking to a friend and her son mentioned, "Oh, I have this hilarious teacher at school," and this ties back into something you said earlier. I said, "Is it a guy or a girl?" He's like, "It's a woman." I'm like, "Oh," because usually it's the guys that are funny, because women try to seem so professional and keep it on the straight and narrow. So earlier you mentioned that women usually aren't the one that do the comedy in writing.
It's very unusual, particularly in genre. I mean, there certainly are examples out there, but I think I could challenge people to come up with 10 examples in the past 20 years, and they would find it difficult. I mean, people like Connie Willis will write humor, and there are certainly many extremely capable female authors out there who inject humor into their book, but I wouldn't call their primary stance humor. And the ones, if you wanted to name them in genre, are people like Christopher Moore and Terry Pratchett, Douglas Adams, those are the big names in the funny side.
Is Douglas Adams a woman?
No.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I tend to think of Kaja Foglio.
Oh yeah, there's graphics certainly. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just for comedy
Canyon.
writing, it's of course it is online and in a comic format, but yeah, she definitely does some good comedy in that.
Yes, and like I said, they are out there, but I do think they're sort of few and far between. And I tend to really gravitate, like Wendy said earlier, to a strong female main character. That's what I identify with. And fortunately or unfortunately, most of the time, those are books that are written by women. And so, I love urban fantasy partly because of that trope. But I wanted urban fantasy that was funny. So that's kind of the lean. I think since then I've found like Kitty Norval and some exceptions to those. But I wanted to really. There's going to be
people following in your footsteps,
I hope
you're blazing a trail that others can step in. And as a guy, I like your writing. I like your story format because it is funny, and there is a woman that you can respect instead of a simpering, yeah.
Thank you.
It's nice.
There's a saying amongst my fans, and I don't know who started it, but the saying is you can always tell a Gail Carriger fan because the men are always gentlemen and the ladies are always outrageous, which I think many of the ladies are also gentle women, but it is funny the crowd that comes to my signings are pretty fun and eccentric. And I once had a hilarious double down with Patrick Rothfuss, and the split in the style of reader was intense. You could just look into the crowd and see who belonged to me and who belonged to him.
Well, speaking of eccentric and outrageous, let's talk about your fashion sense, because I adore how you dress. I love it, from the hairstyles to the glasses to the clothing. So what inspired that? And is that just what you do in public, or is that how you go out every day?
Well, you guys, for the secret, the secret is out. I'm actually on video right now. No one else can see it, but you guys can see kind of what I look like in everyday life, which is I like rockabilly essentially in everyday life. So I like to kind of combine retro with like rock and leather and stompy boots. And I never really left my goth phase. I just added color into it.
Right.
I like that.
So I don't like. You can if you would like to imagine that I dress in head-to-toe steampunk at all times, please feel free to do so. But I do live in California, and that would be a little warm most of the time.
Yeah.
So I tend to do that. And then for most conventions that aren't steampunk conventions, I like to dress in like full head-to-toe 1950s, late 40s, 50s, and 60s regalia.
It's still stylized and elegant in a modern sense, because it's still a throwback from now.
Exactly. And I love the way it looks. I'm a real girly girl, so I love putting on a pretty dress, but I'm a writer, so I don't get to do that very often. I'm usually, frankly, in yoga pants. Although
the replacement for sweatpants.
Yes. Now that I have my remote office, I actually have to dress up every day, which is kind of exciting. But so for events, I like to really dress up and do full makeup and put on gloves and nice shoes. I have a terrible shoe habit, so all of my shoes get put out on display for events. I don't expect that other people need to dress that way by any means, but I love it. And part of it, I will admit, is I did think about it before I started really pulling out all the stops for events, and I like to be recognized. Like, I go to conventions to meet my readers, and you can spot me amongst the geeks and the nerds and the dorks at a science fiction convention, because I'm one of the only ones who'll be dressed like head to toe retro. And that's intentional, because that's why I'm there. I'm there to be spotted and have people come up and say hi and introduce themselves.
What a great attitude there. So you're not one of the folks who rushes from point A to point B. You leave a half hour early because you know it's going to take that long to get from point A to point B.
Unless I don't have time. There are some conventions where they book me so hardcore that I'm literally running at all times. But then I usually try and do like a tweet up or be available at the bar or sit around in the evening so that people can come and say hi.
And you were here in Nebraska in July, I believe it was.
Yeah, for Ozfest in Omaha.
Yeah, and I was so disappointed because the movers had not brought our stuff from England yet, so I didn't have any of your books here, and I was like, I want to go meet her and have her sign her books, but I don't have them, so I'm hoping you come back to Omaha one of these days, perhaps next year. They have. Yes, I'm sure I'll be in that area. That greater area seems to pull me back relatively frequently. There's a very active steampunk community in that area, and so and people will drive. I didn't realize this about the sort of Nebraska zone, is that people will drive long distances for events there in a way that they don't do in other parts of the country. Like, happily just get into a car and drive 6 hours in order to go to a convention for the weekend, which is pretty fantastic. So I will see familiar faces, but they're familiar faces from like Minneapolis or something, and I'm like, oh, what are you doing in Omaha? And they're like, well, we just decided to come down for a drive.
I know a lot of people that will drive 10 to 14 hours to go to a weekend-long convention.
That's serious. That's commitment, but devotion.
It's fun. It's like going to Disney World for the weekend. You know, you enjoy it. It's opening, closing one cost, and you get 3 days of fun. And yeah, why not? I can understand why people find it worth it. I was that person when I was a fangirl. So, but so who were you a fangirl of? Have you ever geeked out over someone?
Oh, Tamora Pierce, my one and only like major. Meeting an author hero, sort of shaking and squeaking, with Tamora Pierce and Terry Pratchett.
Nice.
Tamora Pierce I managed to speak. Terry Pratchett I actually squeaked. Fortunately, I was with my best friend who is very capable under fire and just nattered away at him quite happily. But
good. You had a translator.
I did.
What that's peak, it's a geek squeak.
Yes, I think now, one of the things that I've learned being a professional author and sort of hanging out with all the other professional authors and being on the other side of the fence, as it were, is that, we're all just authors and people, and we all struggle with the same things and deal with the same contracts, and,
Well, Wendy has 3 or 4 books out. Forgive me for not remembering right off the top of my head, because she has like one about to come out. And when I told her, in just a couple hours, we're going to get to talk to Gail, and the listeners won't be able to see, but she had her arms clutched together and she was rocking back and forth. So It's always great when you get to meet somebody that does, well, bring you joy.
Yeah.
You know, somebody you enjoy. And then when you meet them, they're actually fun. They connect with you, they interact, and they have a good time doing it. That's so much more awesome than
it is,
the other
and
kind.
It's exciting. But I will say, as a warning to people out there, that many authors are understandably introverted and recalcitrant and kind of non-social people. And so I have, back in the day, fangirl-wise, met a couple of authors who I loved as authors, and I was terribly disappointed to meet them in person. And for me, that was part of the learning experience. You know, I didn't realize it at the time, but I was absorbing a lot of things when I was a fangirl about being a professional, like how to behave on panels and how to behave as an author to your readership. And fortunately, I never had an author, you know, be mean to me or disappoint me or anything like that. But I do think about that, and I struggle not to do it at events and online. And it is a struggle sometimes because I'm not really an extrovert either. I've this is a skill I've learned, and it is a skill.
It is. I agree. I'm the same way. I do this show every week, but naturally, I like sitting back and people watching. It's not for me to step forward and be the center, but I wanted something, and it wasn't out there, so I made it. And that sounds like what you're talking about. You do too. You turn on when you're in the public spotlight, and then you go home and go, "Oh, thank God! Let me just have some quiet time and pet my cat."
That's totally it. Yeah, one of the things I talk to people about is, and one of the reasons I don't do as many at events as I'm fortunate enough to be invited to, is because it is really exhausting for me, and I have to take time ahead of time to sort of gear up for it. So I usually lose the day before an event, and then the day traveling, and then the same thing at the back end, the day traveling back, and then the day after that, just to get my head back around and ready to write again.
Yeah.
Because it is like switching on two different personalities.
I know a fun question. So when you write, do you have a ritual?
I do. I'm so ritualized. Well, I do sort of, I don't function actually very well first thing in the morning at all. So that is the time where I have all these I have these crazy rituals. So I have to.
If you don't mind sharing, we'll listen.
Yeah.
I have to check my email with my phone in the morning because that keeps me from responding to anybody, so that I don't respond very grumpily or nastily, because it's too much work for me to sort of type on the iPhone. So that allows me to just look through and see if there are going to be any fires that I'm going to have to put out that day. So basically that's and then I sort
You're
of
pre-gauging your stress level.
And then I check up on everything and check up on Twitter and Facebook and all the things that I need to check up on first thing in the morning, but I don't really respond or do anything. Sometimes I'll tweet interesting things from feed, you know, like if there's an octopus thing or something I want to share with somebody, I'll do that.
Yeah, retweeting's easy.
And that's usually, I'm literally huddled on the couch with a mug of tea in one hand and my phone in the other hand, and not saying anything to anybody and just sort of doing that. So that's my mornings. And then I'm kind of paranoid about making sure that I don't neglect my body, partly because I had this sort of medical thing with my wrists, which almost stymied both careers. So I always take time in the mornings to do a program called Classical Stretch, which is sort of dance stretching, active stretching. So I usually do that in the mornings. And then I bike to my office, breakfast and then bike to my office. And then
Do you have people recognize you while you're on the bike?
No.
No. One day. Somebody's going to be like, oh, you!
Come running up to you.
No, people really don't recognize, because I'm so much more precise about my hair and my makeup than
Gotcha.
when
Maybe you should ride a bike like Pee Wee Herman's, and that would help with the retro thing.
I have looked at those awesome new retro bikes with the big fenders. Oh, they weigh a ton. They're so impractical. And bike theft is rampant where I live, so I have this old beater that I've had since I was 14 that I still ride, that I love. But
that's retro in itself there. Yeah.
I bike into my fabulous little office, and then I do a bunch of social media stuff usually. So it often looks like I'm on social media all the time, but that's because I handy little scheduler for Twitter. So,
by the way, we spoke with your assistant. Do you want to give a quick shout out to her? Because she was great.
Sure. I don't really talk about her very often because, I don't know, sometimes you get flack as an author if you have an assistant.
I guess, yeah. No, but it's handy when you're scheduling and trying to write, and there's your defense. You're trying to put out the product that people love, so it helps to have somebody just cover your bases while you're doing that.
You are very busy.
I am one of those people who's like, I can do it all myself. And I had essentially a kind of nervous mental breakdown quasi thing at the beginning of this year, which resulted in me, I actually went on to my blog and went public about this, but it resulted in me having to delay a book for a year and a half. I had to just blow deadline. And I was so upset about it. And everybody was super understanding about it. But, and that was the point where essentially I was like, I can't, because they have me on a 6-month cycle, which means I'm writing a book every 6 months. And it's not so much that I can't do that. It's that I then have to double down and edit at the same time as I'm starting to write the next book. And it was just kind of messing with my head, and I wasn't good at coping. And basically everybody came down the wire. All of my author friends who are at about the same kind of writing schedule and earning level and place in their careers as me were like, get an assistant. And my partner was like, you kind of need to consider getting an assistant. And then
I don't think I ever realized writers have them.
Yeah, there's
never occurred to me.
Quite a handful of us who do. And then my agent was like, it's time. When my agent shakes her fist at me, I listen to her. So
it's a milestone.
She said that's what she said. She said all of my writers who are at your career point have assistants. She's like, you don't need a full-time one, just a part-time one. And so purely luckily, coincidentally for me, a good friend of mine who I stay in touch with on Facebook was basically just like, I hate my job. Does anybody have part-time work? And I was like, actually, of all the people in my scope who I could name that I could share an office with, Vina is probably the only one. And she's got a personality type that fits with me. And and she's basically like my brain, and she just does all the scheduling. So she's essentially like my first line of defense. So when people approach me for interviews or for conventions or whatever, she's the gatekeeper at this point. And so that she can just fleece out, the scams, but also people who want something immediately that I'm just not going to not be able to get to.
Sure.
She runs the schedule and stuff.
And you can focus on the writing, which is
exactly
probably the fun part.
It's work.
So what's the rest of your ritual? We interrupted your ritual.
Oh, so I come in and I work, and then I have some lunch, and then I usually stay working till about 2:00 in the afternoon, and then at 2 is my hard stop, and then I turn around. If I'm on a deadline for a project, that's when I have to start writing. And my rule is 2,000 words every single day that I'm on a deadline. And so sometimes I'm done by 5:00 in the afternoon or 4:00 if the flow is good. And sometimes I'm stuck in the office until 9:00 at night. And I can't. I'm very strict because I am a slacker. So
when you're in a good flow, how many words an hour will you write?
I don't really keep track of it because I'm so trained now into the 2,000 word thing that.
Well, how fast can?
I don't know. I can type pretty fast, 75, something like that.
Oh no! What I'm saying is, on the day where it's just moving for you and flowing, how quick can you get through your 2,000?
Oh, 2 hours is probably my best. But I have to. The way I write, I'm a perfectionist. So if I let myself, I'll just keep rewriting the first chapter over and over and over again. So I instituted a rule where I can only read what I wrote the day before. So what I usually do is I'll sit down at the computer, I'll reread the 2,000 words I wrote yesterday, and then I'll write the 2,000 words for that day. And as I reread the 2,000 words from yesterday, I'll edit and get back into the flow and relearn the voice and figure where I am in the book, and then write the next 2,000 words.
That's good to reread that previous day because it gets you back into there.
Yeah. So that's why it takes a little bit longer than it might if I just sat down and typed out a short story or something like that.
What are you working on now?
Oh, goodness. Well, it's the time of the year where everything seems to be happening. And like I said before, it's kind of interesting because for me, this is all everything that was the madness at the beginning of my year. So let me see. The trade paperback version of Etiquette and Espionage just came out in the United States, or it's just about to come out. And no, it just came out. And the new hardback of the next book in the Finishing School series, Curtsies and Conspiracies, comes out at the beginning of next month on November 5th, which
I am so looking forward to that.
I'm really excited. And it's so much fun because this is the point where we get to have boys. So there are boys in the book. So that makes me really happy. I'm secretly a 14-year-old girl always. So
is that why you wrote Soap?
Yeah.
From the first book. Is he your book crush right now?
Sort of. Maybe just a little bit. Yes.
So we'll see more of him, I'm sure, and other
you will
boys.
see much more of those. Yes. Yeah.
Yay.
And you'll see you see some more of the Pistons who were introduced who are basically like the goth emo boys of my steampunk universe, because I had a big thing for boys with eyeliner when I might still have a big thing for boys with eyeliner. So
we won't tell.
Don't tell him.
So
yes,
between you and the listeners.
Yeah. Me and hundreds and hundreds of people.
There you go.
So that's going on. And then I started, well, let's see. I should say that, and then I have a sort of super secret project, lots of super secret projects, but I wrote an in-world short story about Alexia's father, Alessandro Terabati, who is even earlier in time than the Finishing School books. And so I wrote this little teaser short story about him, which kind of has to do with the Godbreaker plague, and you get to see his dynamic with Flute, and Flute's a young man. And you also get to see a little tiny peek at how he met Alexia's mother.
Nice.
So that is coming out as a special in a collection out of the UK, but if you're in the US, you can order it. So expect that'll be on my blog soon.
I'm curious what attracted Alexia's parents to each other, because her father seems like he wouldn't want someone like her mother.
He's a bit of a douche nozzle, actually. He's
really?
Oh, so
you get that from Flute in the Parasol Protectorate series. He definitely goes meow.
Yeah.
So it was, and that was part of the fun. Is I really enjoyed writing an anti-hero for the first time. So I had fun playing with him.
You also have a Kickstarter that started on October 1st.
And yes, and that's me kind of branching out. So I took a breather. This was years ago, kind of right after Changeless, I think. I had a little break in my schedule before I had to write Blameless, and so I just decided to write something completely different. For me, something completely different was science fiction. So I was a fantasy reader as a girl, and it took me a really, really long time to learn to love sci-fi. Mm-hmm. And part of that was I felt that there weren't, what we talked about before, there were no strong young women kind of kicking ass in space. So I thought, and basically the same thing that happened with Solus happened with this, which is, well, I guess I have to write it. There are more now, but I was like, I want to write this story. And so it's a complete breach for me, and a total aberration in style and everything else. But I had
crossing genres again.
Crossing genres, I know. I had a great time. There is some humor, but it's not primarily humorous. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of this whole amalgamation of a bunch of stuff that interests me, like the cotton mills in the north of England using child labor. So I took that concept, and I love the kind of the strict caste system of India. So I sort of took that concept, and I built these and I love the Wari, which I think are a really underutilized, interesting culture. They're the pre-Inca culture in the highlands of Peru. And I took a bunch of elements from them and injected that into an alien culture. And so I just had a grand old time playing with creating a space station and aliens and all that sort of thing. And one girl's kind of exciting journey within these contexts of sort of breaking out of a strict caste system and finding out that these skills that she's learned to do this job, which is like this cotton mill outcast trash collector job essentially on her space station, translate and make her valuable in other parts of the universe. And so
that's great. You have a garbage woman.
I do, basically.
That's awesome.
That's what the name of the story is, Crud Rat, because they're called rats, these kids, and what they scoop and deal with and have to get rid of is crud, which is the excess stuff that accumulates on space stations.
Definitely dark and gritty there, literally and otherwise. So nice.
But it's so fun. I mean, she has a little kind of cat monkey creature that digests crud. That's like the garbage disposal unit that kind of companions with her all the time. And she has blue hair, so it's not all. Yeah, the
now,
crud
is that genetic or dyed?
It's the crud that you work with. It sort of turns everything blue. So, like, if you're a redhead, you start getting blue freckles. I'm having too much fun. It was really a blast. So, and I couldn't really do anything with it. It had to kind of fall to the wayside. This little story, this sort of story of my heart, and so I've just passed along to a friend of mine who happens to be big in podcasting, and he really, really loved it. And he said, basically, let me make this into an audio drama. And I said, that'd be great, but it would be fun. It'd be cool if you could be paid for your time and the voice talent could be paid for your time. So why don't we see if we can do a Kickstarter for it? And we're not really trying to raise very much, but just enough to make sure that everybody involved is paid. And I'm not taking anything. I just want to see what happens. And it's just for this full cast audio. And some of the stretch goals will include like a print-on-demand version of the book, but essentially it's just for the audio. Because one of my other passions as a child was audiobooks. So, and I'm a podcast addict. So
nice.
This was, and it feels like Maura, who's the main character, it feels like her story and her voice really kind of lends itself to an audio production. So hopefully we'll get to do it and people will love it.
Well, we'll definitely post a link on the event page as well as our regular page and share that around and whatnot. So it's now on October 8th, just last week, you had Etiquette and Espionage that was released in the trade paperback. So
yeah, which is good because in young adult, as I'm sure you guys know, you're released first in hardback because you're interested in making sure the books get into schools and libraries. So hardback is almost always the first edition version.
Actually, I didn't know that, so that's a nice piece of education for me. No pun intended.
So these ones, but my adult books were always released as mass markets, actually. Mm-hmm. But so this is Etiquette and Espionage's foray in the U.S. market into trade paperback. In the UK, it's already out in paperback. But
well, I know a lot of
it lowers the price point, and it means that more people can afford to buy it.
The one friend that turned me on to you, who lives about 0.2 of a mile, she has a 12-year-old daughter that is reading all kinds of young adult, from Percy Jackson to other things. So I'm sure she'll be, if she hasn't already read this, I will be mentioning this to her and let her pick it up, and then she can mention it to her school.
Yay! That is awesome.
Mm-hmm.
I hope she loves it. I hope
she's a good reader, and so I think she will, and she really likes Hunger Games and whatnot, so yeah, and of course, good, strong female characters who aren't, like you said, the Resident Evil type, stereotype. It's nice to see that they're thinking and they're feeling and they're still moving forward. So
I could definitely turn her on to the Finishing School series because I think it's great for not just 12-year-old girls. I think it's great for even women my age. So
well, yeah. I'll read it also and see if I can give it to my 10-year-old son.
I don't
totally
believe
appropriate.
Yeah, I don't believe in writing down to an audience at all. Yeah. So I think that what a lot of people love about the adult books, they'll also love about the young adult books. Mm-hmm. I mean, there isn't as much nookie and sex, obviously. That's one of the things that I tone down. And it's a sort of single POV rather than either multiple POVs or back and forth duel, which I do.
The thing is, even in your adult ones, I didn't find the nookie and sex to be too much.
Yes, it's very refined. One of the things that I challenged myself to do was to write those scenes without ever mentioning a single body part. So it's very Victorian. Everything is alluded to, but I hope they're still pretty sexy. But
they are. Thinking back now, the bedroom scenes and whatnot, where they're more teasing and flirting and leading into it, and then you break away from it. And I don't know, that's fine. I would not even have a problem with my son reading that sort of thing, because it's not in your face.
And I want it to be like a real, genuine relationship with two people in bed, especially some of the later Alexia books where they've been married for a while.
Right.
Because I think in the best relationships, I hope at least, a good deal of humor enters the bedroom eventually. And, and Alexia and Connell have this kind of combative relationship already. I did that on purpose because it's so much fun to write, where they're both very alpha dominant personality types. So they're always kind of constantly challenging each other. But I hope, comes across this sort of underpinning of love and devotion to one another.
I think so.
That allows that combativeness to degenerate into humor often.
Yeah, I think so. Now, also on November 5th, you've got something else launching.
Yes, that's the new Curtsies and Conspiracies. So that's the second finishing school book. And
I can't wait for those in paperback, so I buy them as soon as they come out in hardcover.
Yay! Oh wow, that's commitment. Yeah, the Curtsies and Conspiracies is it's the second novel in the series, which it's really nice because you've done your sort of establishing of characters and you've gotten everybody in the groove and in the flow of the book. And I feel like with the second book, you can actually really start having fun and telling stories and having adventures. So you really get to see Sophronia start to. So in the first book, she's figuring out about herself and this school, the strange school that she's suddenly finding herself at. And in the second book, she's starting to figure out how that school fits into the greater world around her. And so the idea being, like in most classic YAs, the path for Sophronia is how does she fit into the universe, and how does she self-actualize, and how does she find purpose as a human being. And so the second book gets to really start putting her on that path. So
I don't think many readers actually realize how much depth of thought you've put into that.
Well, this is my secret, of course, is that I'm terribly, terribly frivolous.
I can see that from your writing ritual.
Yeah, there's no undercurrent in my books at all.
No, definitely not. Definitely not. What else do you have going on? You going to any conventions or appearances in the next couple months?
Well, since November, Curtsies and Conspiracies releases, I have a bunch of kind of book launch stuff. So I'm doing that. It's mostly local to the San Francisco Bay Area, but if you are local to the Bay Area, I'll probably be near you at some point. So I'm doing like East Bay, North Bay, South Bay. I think I'm doing everything but
Old
the peninsula. And then let me think. I'm looking at my calendar at the moment. It's pretty much just, and then I'll be in Seattle for the launch. I have a couple of events in Seattle. You can check my website has an events tab, which everything is on. And that pretty much, and then I'm going to Canada, to Edmonton for Pure Spec, which is a little convention up there,
nice.
Which is exciting. I've not managed to make it to Canada yet, so that'll be pretty darn cool.
Yeah. Why don't you give everybody your website real quick?
Okay. Oh, it's just, you can just Google Gail, spelled Gail, Carriger, Carriger. But even if you misspell it, I'll probably come up. And the website's the first thing to get.
Because she's everywhere.
Yeah.
Great.
And then I get December off.
Nice. So you
I
got
don't-
big holiday plans, or are you just hiding?
No, I don't like to travel during the holidays for any reason.
Don't blame
So
you.
I kind of, because I do so much traveling now. It's really funny. I transferred from being an archaeologist to being an author, and I travel more now than I did then.
How often do you find you bring your archaeology knowledge as well as your other educational knowledge into play in your books and writing and whatnot?
It hasn't really entered the finishing school books all that much, and I don't think it's going to, but it certainly is in the adult books quite a bit. There's a couple. There's a mummy unwrapping in Changeless is straight out of my first museum docent gig, which was at the Rosicrucian Egyptian Museum. And then the site that they visit, the Etruscan site that they visit in Blameless, is my first excavation site. So I sneak it in all the time.
Nice.
And then what else is there? Yeah, in Blameless as well, they go to Florence, which was the nearest major city to. So I'm very familiar with Florence. So I like to write about places and things that I'm comfortable with.
What about in your sci-fi book? Did you find yourself working stuff in there?
Well, yeah, because the main alien culture is based off of a kind of amalgamated Wari and Inca concept. Because I wanted to build alien life that were alien to a Western mindset. And for me, as an archaeologist, the most comfortable thing to do is rely on an ancient culture that's understudied and unfamiliar to most people in the United States and England. So that's my own background. So I do that. And then in the upcoming, the Parasol Protectorate Abroad series, which hopefully will be out the year after next, which I start writing beginning of next year. This is the thing about being an author. I'm like 6 years out at this juncture. But
is that exciting or intimidating to you?
I'm very goal oriented. So
that's good.
I love knowing I can't even go for a bike ride without having a purpose for that bike ride. I can't. I'm not one of those people who can just go for an ambling walk.
You're one of the people at Disneyland, and you've got the map with the trail highlighted. We're doing this.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Has to be, yeah. So, anyway, so the Prudence books, I'm probably my last excavations were in Peru, in the highland of Peru, and so I'm hoping to incorporate some of those elements into some of the Parasol Protectorate Abroad books. So, fingers crossed.
What do you read now?
What do I,
What authors do you read now? When you sit down to read, what do you like to read?
I read a lot of space opera and military space stuff, usually with strong female heroines like Tanya Huff's Valor series with Torrin Kerr. And I just started reading I think Jamie Jameson or something like that is the name of the author. I can look it up for you.
Oh, here's a recommendation for you. I'm sorry, go on.
It has to be different from what I'm writing. That's my only kind of major stipulation. Usually when I'm writing an actual rough draft, it's almost always, I have to read primary Victorian sources because I'm terrified that my voice is going to be colored. So I always try and read things that I want to be influenced. So I'll read P.G. Woodhouse and I'll read Gaskell and I'll read, go back to Amelia B. Edwards or something when I'm writing the books because I want that tonality to leak into my writing, and
you want to hang out with your peers while you're creating.
Exactly. So it's very strange to say, but one of the things I really avoid is reading other steampunk authors.
No, that doesn't sound strange at all. It's I've been concerned about that also, and read to what I'm writing in a sense also, but not too much. And the beauty of the modern steampunk author is there is such a huge diversity.
There is.
That you can read something and not get caught up in something that mixes with yours.
Exactly. I could read something like Sherry Priest, which is heavily dystopian, Western, zombie, dark kind of thing. And I think that wouldn't really affect me detrimentally. But I tend to really gravitate towards things that are very different from what I'm writing at the time. Possibly because I also need a brain break. I don't know.
No, it's understandable.
Go for some bodice rippers and.
I will pick up a romance. Yes, absolutely. I find romance is very formulaic and sometimes quite badly written. Although some of them are beautifully written. So I tend to kind of avoid certain writers, shall we say. But I'm surprised sometimes, and I will always read comedy, and I often read a lot of nonfiction as well. So most of the books that I've read recently have been nonfiction.
Very cool. I think that's about going to wrap it up for us here before we head into our next thing. And you're welcome back anytime. You've been awesome.
Thanks so much for having me. I will definitely come back.
Absolutely. Was there anything else you wanted to cover before we wrap it up?
No, I think we've done everything. I hope that I've answered people's questions and given them sneaky secret information and all sorts of exciting stuff like that.
I think they're going to be pleased.
Oh, yeah.
I don't doubt it. So, thank you very much, and we hope to see you again, whether in person at one of your sightings or
That would be
anytime
awesome.
Anytime you're coming out with something new, give us a holler and
I will.
come
definitely.
on for 3 minutes to a whole show and let folks know what's going on.
Great. We'll do it.
Wendy, do you want to say goodbye before we...
Thank you so much for popping by. It was great to have you here.
Oh, it was lovely to meet you both.
Our pleasure.
Before we go, I want to remind everyone that you can email us at rightnightshow@gmail.com. That's right with the W, night with an N, show@gmail.com. To let us know your thoughts on the show's topic, suggest other topics you'd like to hear us discuss, or just have a message read out on air to someone in your life. Thanks to everyone for supporting the show by downloading the podcast, sharing it on social media, grabbing some shirt stickers and mugs from bit.ly/tavern merch, or barware patches and hats from bit.ly/tavern merch too. It's bit.ly/tavern merch or tavern merch followed by the number 2.
Thank you for joining author Travis I. Sivart and the other writers, content creators, and all-around amazing people for our discussion here on Right Night. Join us again soon, and until you do, make sure you create with passion, enjoy the journey, and remember, every night can be right night.